I still remember the day we got the keys. After years of scraping by, skipping dinners out, saying no to little luxuries, we finally had a place to call ours. Our home. It wasn't huge, and some of the floorboards creaked when you walked across them, but to me, it felt like magic. I ran my hands along the walls, imagining the sound of tiny feet one day pattering down the hallway. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful, something bigger than just the two of us. We were so full of hope. Every night was filled with soft whispers and dreaming out loud. Maybe this time, we'd say with a smile, holding each other a little closer. I remember looking at him and thinking, this is it. This is where we start our family. We cleared out the smallest room and started calling it the nursery, even though it still had boxes stacked to the ceiling. We didn't care. We were already picturing cribs and bedtime stories and the scent of baby lotion on warm skin. But weeks turned into months. Then more months. Each time my period came, it was like a quiet heartbreak, one I tried not to show. At first, we told ourselves it just wasn't the right timing. Stress, maybe, or bad luck. But eventually, I think we both started to worry, silently, separately. I could see it in the way he stopped rubbing my back when I cried, in the way he'd changed the subject if I brought up baby names. I started to feel like I was slowly breaking, but I wasn't ready to admit it. We decided to get tested. It felt scary, but also like progress. Like maybe we could find an answer and fix whatever was standing in our way. When the call came, I could tell from the nurse's tone that something was wrong. She told me I was infertile. Just like that. Her voice was clinical, like she was reading a weather report, and then, "Your husband's results are completely normal." I couldn't breathe. I didn't even know where to put that kind of pain. But the worst part wasn't the diagnosis. It was the way he looked at me afterward, like I'd ruined everything. I thought he'd hold me. I thought he'd say something like, "We'll figure this out," or, "I love you no matter what." But instead, he got quiet, cold. It was like a door slammed shut between us, and no matter how much I knocked, he wouldn't let me back in. He wouldn't touch me, wouldn't look me in the eye, and when he did speak, his words came sharp, like little blades dipped in blame. "What's the point of this house if there's no family in it?" he snapped one night. I felt my chest cave in. I begged him to talk, to sit with me and figure out a plan. Adoption, maybe, or a surrogate. I even suggested we take time, focus on us, rediscover what made us strong in the first place. But every idea I offered was met with silence or sarcasm. "I don't want someone else's kid," he finally said one night, tossing his keys on the counter like my heart wasn't splitting in half. I stood there, stunned. It wasn't just rejection. It was cruelty dressed up as disappointment. I started walking on eggshells around him, trying not to make things worse. I'd cook his favorite meals, even though he barely touched them. I'd ask about his day, pretending not to notice the new cologne or the way he hid his phone. He wasn't just pulling away, he was disappearing right in front of me. And no matter how tightly I clung to the memory of who he used to be, I couldn't stop the slow unraveling. I was losing the dream, and I was losing him. One night, I sat on the edge of the bed while he changed in the bathroom. I looked around the room, at the framed wedding photo on the dresser, the baby book still unopened on the nightstand, the little slippers we bought just in case. And I felt it deep in my bones. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was a breaking point. I had lost a dream, but what hurt even more was realizing I might have already lost him. After that night, everything felt different, colder, quieter. I'd wake up in the morning and stare at the ceiling, listening to him shuffle around without saying a word. No good morning, no kiss on the forehead, just footsteps. Like we were roommates in some painfully quiet arrangement. I started pretending too, smiling when I didn't want to, nodding like I was fine, brushing off concerned glances from friends. I told myself, maybe this is just what marriage becomes. Maybe love fades. But late at night, when the world was still and my thoughts got loud, I knew better. Love doesn't vanish like that. It doesn't turn to ice over a test result. No, what we had was something else now. Something brittle and sharp. I started questioning everything. Did he ever really want a child? Or did he just want the idea of it? Did he love me or just the version of me that could give him what he wanted? I couldn't shake those questions. They stuck to me like damp clothes. There were moments when I'd catch him staring at nothing, jaw tight, fingers tapping. I'd ask if he was okay, but he'd just shrug or walk away. He was there, physically, eating dinner across from me, sleeping beside me. But emotionally, he was long gone. And still, I held on. Because that house, that dream, the nursery we never filled, it was more than just a wish. It was a promise. One I wasn't ready to let die. Not yet. Not like this. And maybe that's why I didn't see what was coming next. I was too busy trying to save what we had, too focused on keeping the dream alive, to realize that what I was holding on to might already be gone. At first I told myself it was just grief, that he was hurting too, just in a different way. I tried to be patient. I tried to understand. But the man I married was disappearing, and in his place, there was someone I barely recognized. He stopped coming home for dinner. Sometimes he wouldn't even bother texting. Other times, he'd come through the door with a sigh so heavy it made the walls feel thinner, and when he did speak, it wasn't with love, it was with disdain, like I'd become a burden. He started making little digs, always with that tone, the kind that cuts deeper because it's dressed up like a joke. "Maybe if you actually worked out," he said once, tossing his gym bag into the closet. Or, "Some women don't need doctors to get pregnant, you know." I'd laugh it off in front of him, but in the bathroom mirror later, I'd stare at myself until my eyes burned, picking apart every flaw, wondering if I'd ever feel like enough again. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence was punishment enough. I still tried to reach him. I suggested therapy, offered to talk, really talk, to figure things out. I even brought up adoption again, hoping maybe this time he'd soften, but he just scoffed, rolled his eyes and said, "I don't want someone else's kid." As if the word "someone else's" didn't sting like betrayal. I stood there frozen, hands trembling, realizing I was alone in this. And maybe I had been for a while. That night, I sat in the living room after he'd gone out again. The lights were low, the silence thick, and I couldn't stop the thoughts. When did we stop being us? When did love turn into obligation, into resentment? I didn't have the answers, but I could feel something shifting inside me, something raw, something that wasn't quite anger yet, but was getting close. It wasn't long before the signs became impossible to ignore. Lipstick smudges on shirt collars. A receipt for a fancy dinner, for two, on a night he said he had a work meeting. Perfume that didn't belong to me lingering in the car. At first, I wanted to believe I was being paranoid, that maybe grief really does make you imagine things. But deep down, my gut already knew, and once that door opened, there was no closing it again. His phone became a secret vault. He used to leave it charging on the nightstand, never thinking twice. Now, it was always in his pocket or face down on the table. He'd smirk at messages, tapping away with a grin he never showed me anymore. Once I asked who he was texting. He barely looked up and said, "Just a friend." And the way he said it, so dismissive, so practiced, made something crack inside me. Not just pain, something colder, like the beginning of detachment. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I didn't even cry. Not in front of him. Instead, I started collecting the pieces, quietly. Watching, noting the changes. How he'd come home freshly showered late at night. How he suddenly cared about his clothes again. How he always had a reason to leave when I needed him most. I was no longer his partner. I was the excuse he used to escape. And the truth? He didn't even try to hide it anymore. One night, I made him his favorite pasta, the one I used to cook when we were first married. He barely touched it. He sat back in his chair, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Maybe I need a real woman, one who can actually give me a child." My ears rang, my stomach turned, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I stared at him, searching for something, regret, guilt, anything human. But there was nothing, just a stranger wearing my husband's face. That night, after he left, probably to see her or someone else, I sat on the kitchen floor, still in the dress I wore to try and feel attractive again. The pasta was cold on the stove, the wine untouched. I stared at the front door, half expecting him to walk back in and say it was all some cruel joke. But nothing came. Just the sound of the clock ticking and the hum of the refrigerator, like the house itself was holding its breath with me. I thought about who we used to be, how we'd dance in the kitchen even when we had no music, how he once said he couldn't imagine his life without me. And now, here we were. He couldn't even look at me without resentment in his eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, break a plate, cry into my hands like in those dramatic movies. But I didn't. I just sat there, still, numb, hollowed out by the weight of everything he wouldn't say out loud, but made me feel every day. It's funny how betrayal doesn't always come in one big moment. Sometimes it drips in slowly, word by word, glance by glance, until one day you realize you've drowned in it. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was humiliated, made to feel like my worth was tied to a womb, like love had conditions, expiration dates, and worst of all, I believed it. For a while, I really believed it was me who broke us. But something was changing inside me. It was quiet, but it was there. A flicker of strength I hadn't felt in months. Because in that silence, sitting alone in that dim kitchen, I realized something important. He might have shattered the dream we built together, but he hadn't destroyed me. And what came next would be mine to decide. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. I almost didn't answer. I was folding laundry, his shirts, ironically, and for a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me said, pick up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. Either way, I answered, and that one small choice changed everything. The voice on the other end was hesitant, polite, but nervous. She said she was calling from the clinic, the fertility clinic. At first, I braced for more bad news. I thought maybe they were calling to offer counseling or recommend options. But then her tone shifted, just enough to make my pulse quicken. There's been a mistake, she said. Her words came slow, careful, like she was handling something fragile. She explained that there had been a mix-up. Files had been accidentally swapped with another couple's. My breath caught. I didn't even know what to say. And then she told me the real results. I remember standing perfectly still, like if I moved, the truth might vanish. She told me I was fertile, completely healthy. No issues at all. It was him, my husband, who was infertile. All this time, all the blame, all the shame, all the nights I cried into my pillow thinking I was broken. It wasn't me. It had never been me. I thanked her calmly, told her I appreciated the correction, and hung up. Then I just stood there, staring at the wall, feeling something inside me shift. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even tell anyone. Instead, I smiled. The first real smile in what felt like ages. Not because I was happy. No. It was something deeper, something colder. The kind of smile that comes when pain turns into clarity. Because in that moment, I realized he didn't just lie to me. He destroyed me with that lie. And now I had the truth. And the truth? That was power. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone still in my hand, heart steady. Too steady. It was a strange kind of peace, the kind that settles in after a storm has already flattened everything. I thought about all the times he called me useless, all the times he walked out while I stayed behind trying to hold our marriage together with bare hands and hope. And now, I knew the truth. He wasn't just cruel, he was a coward. A coward hiding behind my pain. I thought about telling him right away, marching into the room, showing him the truth, watching his face crumble under the weight of it. But no, that would be too easy, too fast. He didn't deserve that kind of ending. What he deserved was something slower, something colder. I realized then that I didn't want an apology. I didn't want tears or promises or excuses. I wanted control. I wanted him to feel the weight of everything he'd thrown at me. Only this time, it would be real. So I said nothing. I played the role. I went about my day like everything was the same. I smiled when he looked at me, nodded when he made his usual offhanded comments, and kissed him goodnight like I hadn't just been handed a loaded weapon. I watched him lie to me, still, even when the truth sat quietly in my pocket. And I let him. Because the longer he believed I was still broken, the stronger I became. That night, I sat in the nursery. The room that once made me cry now felt different, empowering even. I ran my fingers along the edge of the empty crib and whispered to no one, "You're not broken. You never were." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel empty. I felt ready. Ready to stop surviving and start planning, because now I had a secret, and I knew exactly what to do with it. The next few days were almost surreal. He kept acting like nothing was wrong, like I was still the broken one, like he still held the upper hand. He'd come home late, lie about where he'd been, toss his jacket over the chair like I should be grateful he came home at all. And I let him. I smiled. I asked how his day was. I played the part so well, I almost convinced myself I was fine. But behind my eyes, I was already rebuilding everything he tried to destroy. Every time he touched me, I had to bite back the urge to pull away. Every time he smirked, every smug joke, every dismissive glance, I saw it for what it really was now. Insecurity, projection, weakness hiding behind arrogance. He hadn't just lied to me. He'd needed me to believe the lie so badly, he made it a weapon. But now that weapon was in my hands, and I wasn't planning to waste it. I started researching quietly, reading, making calls, setting appointments. He didn't notice. He didn't care enough to ask. He thought I was still grieving, still crushed under the weight of infertility. I could almost laugh at how confident he was, how blind. But I didn't laugh. I observed. I gathered strength. Because I wasn't just going to walk away. I wasn't going to let him slither out of this with some story that painted him as the victim. No, I was going to show him who I really was. And the best part? He had no idea. Not a single clue. While he was off playing the role of the injured man, mourning a dream he never truly cared about, I was creating something real, something he'd never be part of. He broke my heart with a lie, and now I was going to break his life with the truth. The first time I walked into the fertility specialist's office alone, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Not hope, not quite. Not yet. But purpose. A sense that I was moving forward, finally, on my terms. The nurse smiled and handed me a clipboard, and I took it with steady hands. I didn't explain why my husband wasn't there. I didn't owe anyone that story. This was mine now, just me. And whoever I might bring into this world. We started the process. Scans, tests, long talks with quiet-eyed doctors. I asked questions. I took notes. I followed every instruction like it was gospel. Not once did I hesitate. Every appointment felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a new life, one that didn't rely on anyone else's permission. I chose a donor carefully, thoughtfully. Not based on looks or status, but on something deeper. Kindness in the notes he left behind, a gentle spirit I hoped my child might inherit. At home, I played the grieving wife. I moved through the house like a ghost with mascara on. I let him believe I was still mourning, still aching for a dream that had died. And in a way, I was. But what he didn't know was that from those ashes, something stronger was already growing. He kept cheating, kept lying, kept underestimating me. And I let him. Because the best plans are born in silence, and mine was nearly complete. Weeks passed. Then came the nausea, the exhaustion, the subtle swell of something new inside me. I stood in the bathroom staring at that tiny pink line, and this time, I smiled without pain. No shame, no fear, just truth. I was pregnant, and the child growing inside me, chosen, loved, wanted, not by him, by me. I waited a few more weeks before I told him. Let the signs build naturally. The morning sickness, the cravings, the small changes he didn't bother to notice. He was so caught up in his double life that mine became invisible. That worked in my favor. When I finally sat across from him at the dinner table and said softly, "I think I'm pregnant," I watched his face twist into something almost grotesque. It was confusion, fear, and something else. Disbelief. All clashing in real time. He laughed at first. A short, breathy laugh, like I'd just told a bad joke. "That's not possible," he said. His fork clattered onto the plate. I tilted my head, played the part, and said maybe it was stress. Maybe the doctor had been wrong. "Maybe it's a miracle," I whispered. His hand started to shake. He asked to see the test. I showed him. He asked when I found out. I lied. I made my voice tremble, pretended to be just as confused as he was. And the more I leaned into it, the more unraveled he became. He started pacing, asking questions I didn't answer, suggesting possibilities I pretended not to understand. He even mentioned going back to the clinic, just to make sure. I told him maybe it didn't matter how. Maybe we should just be grateful. I watched his jaw clench, his eyes darting around the room like he was trying to anchor himself in a reality he could no longer control. That was the moment I knew. I had turned the tide. The man who once made me feel powerless was now completely adrift. But I didn't gloat. I didn't say what I really wanted to say. You don't get to ruin me and still walk away whole. Instead, I rubbed my stomach gently, like I was already protecting the life inside me, and in that moment, I wasn't pretending anymore. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my story and making sure he would never again have the power to write a single word of it. After that, everything shifted. Not just for him, but for me. I felt stronger with each passing day. Each kick, each flutter, each sleepless night reminded me that something real was taking root, something pure. He, on the other hand, spiraled. He started drinking more, snapping at small things, watching me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. I could see it in his eyes. He was terrified, not of the child, but of what that child meant. Because somewhere deep down, he knew the truth. He just didn't have the courage to face it. He tried to regain control, suggesting we see a counselor, asking to come to my appointments. Too little, too late. I kept smiling, kept playing the role of the confused, hopeful wife. I'd hold his hand and nod, pretending I didn't see through him. But every time he looked away, I felt the baby move, and I'd place my hand over my belly like a secret. This wasn't his redemption story. This was our beginning, mine and my child's. At night, he'd lie beside me, quiet and restless. I could almost hear the questions racing through his head. Was the baby his? Could it be? Should he confess to everything? The affairs? The cruelty? The lies? I never gave him answers. I let the silence grow. I let the mystery eat at him. And each time he searched my face for the truth, I gave him the same look he once gave me. Unreadable, detached, cold. Funny how easily the roles reverse when the truth changes hands. And that was the beauty of it. He didn't know what was worse, the fear that the child wasn't his, or the terrifying possibility that it somehow was. And as he unraveled, I only grew steadier. Because while he clung to a version of the past he could no longer control, I was already holding the future in my hands. The day my son was born, the world felt quiet. Not the kind of silence that screams, the kind that settles, like a final note at the end of a long, dissonant song. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs, and soft brown eyes that made my breath catch. I held him close, memorizing every inch of him, and I whispered, "You are everything." He didn't know it yet, but he'd already saved me. Not because he completed me, but because he reminded me I was never incomplete to begin with. My husband, or rather the man who still wore that title, hovered at the edge of the room like a shadow. He held the baby once, just once. Stiff arms, no warmth in his eyes, a smile that didn't quite reach his face. I watched him closely. He was still pretending to be excited, pretending this was his child, pretending we still had a future. And I let him, because every minute he lived in that lie, I held the power a little longer. He started acting different after that, more attentive. He'd cook dinner, ask about my doctor's visits, bring home flowers like some late apology could erase everything. I played along. I let him think we were mending. He even mentioned trying again someday. And I smiled, not because I agreed, but because I knew what was coming. Every moment he spent hoping was one step closer to the fall I'd prepared for him. I waited a full year. I let him believe he had a place in this new chapter, that maybe he'd escaped the consequences of everything he'd done. And on our son's first birthday, as the candles flickered and laughter filled the room from friends he barely noticed, I looked him in the eyes and decided this was the moment, the beginning of the end. He didn't know it yet, but by the time the cake was gone, so would his place in our lives. After the guests left and the balloons began to sag, I found him alone in the kitchen, sipping a beer, looking too comfortable for someone about to lose everything. I walked in, calm, steady, holding a small envelope in one hand and divorce papers in the other. His smile faded the second he saw my face. I said his name softly, almost gently, and he looked at me like I'd said something foreign. "We need to talk," I told him. And then, finally, I told him everything. I told him about the call from the clinic, about the mistake, about how he was the one who was infertile all along. I watched the blood drain from his face, watched him reach for a chair like the truth physically knocked the wind out of him. He stammered, asked if I was sure, as if I'd somehow misheard the voice that gave me my life back. Then I told him about the donor, about the appointments, the decisions, the pregnancy. Alone, by choice, without him. He went from pale to red in seconds. Anger flared. His voice rose, hands clenched. "You tricked me," he said. "You humiliated me." I just shook my head. "No," I replied. "You did that all by yourself." I slid the divorce papers across the counter, slow and final. "You lost me the moment you decided I wasn't enough." He stood there, stunned, a man who built his identity on power, now watching it crumble in real time. But I wasn't done yet. I opened the envelope and showed him the evidence, printed screenshots, photos, timestamps, months of his affairs, the verbal abuse, the moments he thought were invisible. I documented everything. And now it was going to court. His reputation, his pride, his carefully curated image, all of it exposed. He opened his mouth to speak, but there was nothing left to say. He looked like a man who just realized the fire he started had finally reached him. He packed in silence. No shouting, no bargaining, no last-ditch pleas. Just the dull sound of drawers opening, clothes being folded, the occasional clink of metal as he shoved his life into a suitcase. I stood in the doorway with my son on my hip, steady as stone. The same house he once said wasn't worth anything without a child in it, now echoed with the quiet breath of the child he'd never be allowed to call his own. That irony? I savored it like a final note of music I'd been waiting a lifetime to hear. As he walked toward the front door, he paused, right beneath the nursery light we once chose together. I wondered, for a moment, if some flicker of remorse would show in his eyes. But no, just bitterness. The kind that comes when someone realizes too late that their lies cost them everything. The baby in my arms stirred, resting his head against my shoulder. I kissed his hair gently and whispered, "You're safe now." Because we were, truly. The divorce moved fast. The house was in my name. I made sure of that early on. My lawyer had everything he needed, the documentation, the evidence, the timeline. He tried to fight it, of course. Men like him always do. But the court saw through him. They always do, eventually. He lost everything he thought he controlled. The home, the narrative, the illusion. And I walked away with something far more powerful. Freedom, clarity, and a future built on truth. Sometimes people ask if I regret anything, if I ever miss him, if I would have done things differently. The answer? No, not even for a second. He once called me broken, said I was less of a woman because I couldn't give him a child. But I gave life. I gave love. I gave myself back everything he tried to take, and more. And now, he's gone. I'm whole. And my son is everything he never deserved to know.